What happens when a flight attendant dismisses an elderly black woman in first class, thinking she's just another passenger out of place, only to discover the truth midair? This quiet traveler isn't who she seems, and her silence might be the loudest message the airline has ever heard. Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The boarding gate buzzed with its usual rhythm. People checking phones, shifting bags, trying not to bump elbows. A few sighed at the announcement of a slight delay. Others just stared blankly at the screen. It was the kind of morning where nothing dramatic happened. Just another flight from Atlanta to San Francisco, until she showed up. Odessa Langford moved slowly, but not because she was weak. Every step she took felt grounded, like she'd earned the right to take her time. She wore a deep plum cardigan over a modest cream blouse, her silver hair tied back neatly. In one hand, she pulled a small roller bag. In the other, she clutched her ticket. First class, seat 1A. People noticed her, not because she was loud or flashy, but because something about her presence felt out of place. Not wrong, just unexpected. The gate agent, a young woman with a perfect bun and tired eyes, scanned Odessa's ticket. She blinked once, checked again, and forced a smile. "Right this way, ma'am," she said a little too brightly. Odessa nodded kindly. "Thank you, sweetheart." She stepped down the jet bridge slowly, not struggling, just steady. She didn't need help. She wasn't the type to ask for it unless it truly mattered. When she entered the first-class cabin, a few heads turned. A man in a crisp navy blazer gave her a quick once-over and returned to his laptop. A woman with platinum blonde hair and oversized sunglasses peeked above her magazine. Someone in row 2 coughed awkwardly. Odessa didn't look at any of them. She found seat 1A, placed her bag gently overhead, and eased into the plush leather seat. It was comfortable, sure, but comfort had never been her priority. Observation was. She reached for the seatbelt. Her fingers, though careful, weren't as nimble as they used to be. Arthritis had a way of reminding you that time moved on whether you liked it or not. She tried once, twice, adjusting the angle, but the latch wouldn't quite snap. That's when she pressed the call button. Within seconds, a tall woman in her 40s approached. Immaculate hair, red lipstick just right, and a name tag that read Marla. Her expression wasn't unkind, but it wasn't exactly open either. Odessa looked up with a warm smile. "I'm sorry to bother you, but would you mind helping me with this seatbelt? These fingers aren't what they used to be." Marla didn't bend down, didn't move, just looked at the unfastened belt and then back at Odessa. "If you can't fasten your seatbelt by yourself," she said, voice clipped, "maybe you shouldn't be in this seat." There wasn't malice in her tone, just something colder, something practiced, the kind of voice that didn't expect a complaint because it had rehearsed its defense 100 times. Odessa didn't blink. She just nodded slowly. "I see," she said, soft but clear. The people in nearby seats glanced up but said nothing. A man 2 rows behind shifted uncomfortably in his seat. No one stood up. No one asked if she needed help. Marla turned and walked off as if the matter were closed. Odessa didn't try again with the belt. Instead, she pulled out her phone, tapped out a message with deliberate care, and pressed send. It read, "Boarded. Service as expected. We'll keep observing." She placed the phone gently back in her bag, then looked out the window. The tarmac gleamed in the morning sun. A plane nearby began to taxi. She watched it like someone watching water boil, calm, patient, waiting for the right moment. To everyone else on that plane, she was just an old woman who had wandered into a seat above her station. What they didn't know, and what Marla had no way of imagining, was that Odessa Langford wasn't just a passenger. She owned the sky they were flying through, and she had no intention of staying invisible. The plane was in the air now, humming steadily as it crossed above patchy clouds and forgotten cities. Inside the first-class cabin, everything looked just as you'd expect. Dim lights, hushed voices, soft clinks of glass. No one spoke loudly. No one looked around too much. Everyone kept to their little bubbles of comfort. Odessa Langford sat still, her back upright, her hands gently folded in her lap. The seatbelt had been fastened after all, not by help, but with quiet determination after the flight took off. Still, it hadn't been about the belt. It had never been about the belt. She didn't touch her drink, didn't even bother glancing at the screen built into the seat. Instead, she watched people, observed what they did when they thought no one of importance was looking. The man in 1C kept glancing toward her. Not rude, but not friendly either. Curious in that way some people are when they can't quite place where you belong. Across the aisle, a woman clicked her nails lightly against a tablet. Every few minutes, she stole a glance, her lips pressed into a thin line. Odessa wasn't surprised. That look, she'd seen it all her life. It was the kind people gave when they were trying to decide if they should feel sorry for you or annoyed by you. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, not to nap, but to think. There was a memory, Georgia, summer, 1961. She had just turned 13. Her father had taken her on her first real bus trip out of town. They dressed up. He wore his Sunday suit, she wore a pressed dress and white gloves. But when they boarded, the driver told them, flat out, "Seats in the back, folks. You know the rules." Her father didn't argue, just smiled, nodded, and guided her to the rear. Later that night, he told her, "One day, baby, they won't see you as something to move out the way. They'll see you coming, and they'll make room." He died before he got to see that day. But Odessa hadn't forgotten. She opened her eyes again and shifted slightly in her seat. The movement made the woman across the aisle flinch just a bit, then pretend not to have noticed. When the drinks cart came back around, the younger flight attendant smiled at the woman in 1B and asked if she wanted more champagne. She poured with care, napkin folded just so. Then she turned to Odessa. "Water for you again, ma'am?" Odessa smiled kindly. "Actually, I'd like the sparkling, if that's all right." The girl blinked. "Oh, I just thought—" "Never mind. Of course." The bottle hissed open, but the pour was rushed this time. A little spilled on the napkin, and the girl didn't meet her eyes again. When the attendant left, Odessa leaned back once more, taking a small sip. She wasn't upset, not in the loud, bitter way people assumed old women got upset. No, hers was the quiet kind, the kind that sat in your bones. In San Francisco, Jonas Evington had just stepped out of a boardroom when his phone buzzed. He paused in the hallway, checking the message. Boarded. Service as expected. We'll keep observing. He didn't need to ask who it was from. Without a word to his team, he turned back around. "Cancel my afternoon," he told his assistant. "I'm getting on AS 272. "Sir?" she asked. He was already halfway down the corridor. "Just do it. I'll explain later." Back on the plane, Odessa held her cup with both hands. Arthritis made her joints ache in the cold air, but she didn't complain. She simply observed. Marla walked past again, and this time she didn't even glance Odessa's way, as if she didn't exist, as if nothing earlier had happened. Odessa tilted her head slightly and watched the woman go. She wasn't angry. Not really. She'd seen too many angry people burn out before change ever showed up. She reached down and pulled out her phone once more. This time she didn't type anything. Just opened the sent message, read it again, and stared at the timestamp. She whispered, "Let's see how deep the pattern runs." A few rows back, a young man named Darren Morales, seat 3A, had been quietly filming. He'd noticed the exchange over the champagne. He'd seen the glances. He wasn't sure what he was watching just yet, but he knew it wasn't right. He adjusted his camera angle and hit record again. Sometimes change didn't start with shouting. Sometimes it started with silence. The cabin lights dimmed as the aircraft settled into its cruise. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the world looked peaceful. But inside the first-class section of Flight AS-272, a different kind of turbulence was brewing, one that didn't shake the walls or rattle trays, but pressed hard on something deeper. Odessa sat still, the cup of sparkling water untouched on her tray. Her hands rested on the armrests, fingers curled slightly inward. The way older hands often do when the joints have had years to stiffen. She didn't fidget, didn't sigh or shift, but she felt it. It wasn't just Marla's words. It was the way the cabin seemed to close in after them. The little silences, the glances, the decisions people made not to see her. When lunch was served, the attendant brought out meals carefully labeled for each passenger. A tray of lemon chicken, a roll, fruit and dessert went to the man beside her. The woman in 2B got the salmon she'd requested. When it came to Odessa, the tray was smaller. "Apologies," the young attendant said, not meeting her eyes. "We're out of the salmon. This is the vegetarian option." "I had reserved the lemon chicken," Odessa replied gently. "Oh, I'll check with the galley," the girl said, but she didn't return. Across the aisle, the man in 2C, white, mid-30s, gray suit, was eating lemon chicken. Odessa watched quietly, then returned her gaze to the window. It wasn't about the chicken. She'd lived enough years to know how a person could be given less in a way that didn't feel like an error, just a decision, just another small subtraction. From the third row, Darren Morales noticed. He'd watched the drink exchange, and now this. He wasn't looking for a story, but something about this woman, this silence she carried, made him press a record on his phone again. He kept the screen low. No narration, just images, just truth. Farther back in the cabin, Marla Vexley moved with purpose. Her eyes scanned the rows, lips tight. She hadn't said another word to Odessa since that first exchange, not out of guilt. Marla didn't do guilt. She did efficiency, protocol. To her, there were two types of people on a plane, those who fit into the flow of service and those who slowed it down. She didn't need a rule book to tell her which one Odessa was. "Everything all right up front?" asked one of the junior attendants when Marla returned to the galley. Marla glanced over her shoulder, then shrugged. "Fine. Just had a guest who thinks manners come with her seat number." The younger attendant hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." But she didn't sound convinced. The turbulence warning came on. The pilot's voice hummed overhead, calm and practiced. Seatbelt signs blinked back to life. Odessa reached down to fasten hers again. She tugged gently. Her hands weren't as strong after sitting still. The belt caught on the edge. She pressed the call button. Marla was nearby. She saw it light up. She paused, took a breath, then walked forward. When she reached Odessa's seat, she didn't lean in or soften her tone. "Still struggling?" she said, arms crossed. Odessa looked up. Her voice was even, quiet. "Just a little help if you don't mind." Marla smirked, just barely, enough to see it. "Seriously? Again with the seatbelt?" It was said lightly, like a joke, but not the kind anyone laughed at. Her voice carried down the row. A man across the aisle cleared his throat but said nothing. The woman beside him shifted her legs away. Darren's phone caught the moment. He wasn't even sure why he filmed it, but he couldn't look away. Marla walked off. Odessa stared at the ceiling for a few seconds, then fastened the belt herself. Her fingers shook slightly, but she got it done. When she settled back, she closed her eyes. This isn't new, she thought. It's not shocking. It's not dramatic. But it's still here. A part of her wanted to call Jonas right then, to press the button, to say enough. But that wasn't why she boarded this flight. She wasn't here to explode. She was here to expose. The difference, she had learned, is what decides whether things burn down or change. The sun outside had shifted now, casting a warmer light through the airplane windows. Shadows stretched across the carpeted aisle, soft and long, as if time itself had slowed down mid-flight. Odessa sat quietly, her hands folded again, eyes fixed out the window. Clouds rolled beneath them, thick and slow like softened cream. It reminded her of train rides when she was younger, sitting beside her mother, watching cotton fields blur into the horizon. Back then, there were sections for folks like her. Labeled, controlled, contained. This seat, 1A, was never meant for her back then. But now, she owned the plane. And still, she was being made to feel like an outsider, borrowing a place she didn't deserve. Her phone vibrated softly in her purse. She reached in without hurry, touched the screen. A new message sat at the top. "I'm on board, watching. Say the word when you're ready." J.E. Odessa read it twice, then locked the phone again. Jonas was here. That brought a calm she hadn't realized she needed. But it also brought a weight. The decision would now fall to her. How this ended. What came next. She inhaled through her nose and let it out slow. The kind of breath that steadied more than just the lungs. She thought back to the meeting months ago when she finalized her majority stake in Aureus Skyways. Jonas had leaned forward across a polished table and asked her plainly, "What do you want to do first?" And she had told him, nothing public. Not yet. I want to fly unnoticed. I want to see if the stories I've heard are patterns or just people. That had been her plan, and it was working. She was seeing it. But it hurt more than she expected. From down the aisle, Marla was mid-conversation with another passenger, her voice soft and polite now, her smile carefully applied. Not the same woman Odessa had encountered earlier. But then again, bullies often had layers. They didn't roar at everyone, just at those they figured wouldn't fight back. The man in 1C stood and excused himself for the restroom. On his way past Odessa, he paused, glanced down, and offered a short nod. She returned it with a quiet smile. He didn't say anything, but it was something. Tiny shifts. The plane began its slow descent. The captain's voice buzzed overhead with arrival times and gate numbers. Odessa took that as a cue and reached again for her phone. This time she didn't unlock it. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Jonas was waiting. All it took was one word. Proceed. And Marla's job would end the moment they landed. And hadn't that been the plan? She could have pressed it, could have signed her name to a lesson. And yet, her father's voice came back to her, deep and steady like it always had been. Just because you've got the right to strike doesn't mean you need to throw the first one. Think first, then act, and make it count. Odessa looked up. A young flight attendant was watching her from 2 rows away. Not Marla, someone newer, probably no more than 25. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something passed between them, a mix of curiosity, shame, and maybe a touch of admiration. She didn't look away. Odessa smiled gently. The attendant straightened. Then Odessa reached for the call button again, not to summon anyone, but to let Jonas know she was ready. Jonas made his way toward the front cabin. His suit was crisp, his expression unreadable. Passengers noticed. Some sat straighter, some whispered. But Jonas didn't speak to anyone. Not yet. When he reached Odessa's row, he bent slightly. "You look well," he said softly. "I feel complicated," she replied. He chuckled under his breath. "That's about right." She tilted her head toward Marla, who was now standing at the front, arms behind her back, unaware. "I've seen enough," Odessa said. Jonas nodded. "You want to handle it here? Publicly?" She thought for a long moment. Number not here, not like this, not in front of people who'd rather see someone punished than something fixed. Jonas looked down at her phone. "So what should I do?" She tapped her fingers once, twice against the armrest, then said quietly, "Let's give her a chance to see what she's never had to notice. Let's see what she does with that." Jonas didn't smile, but there was a light in his eyes now. Respect, clarity. He stood and walked away. Odessa turned back to the window. The world looked softer now. The clouds hadn't changed. She had. The seatbelt signs came on again with a soft ding, followed by the pilot's voice floating overhead, calm and practiced. "Folks, we're beginning our descent into San Francisco. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin for arrival." The first-class cabin began to buzz with subtle movement. Passengers adjusting seats, closing laptops, folding newspapers. But there was a different kind of energy pulsing through row 1. Jonas Evington stood now, no longer in the shadows. He didn't announce himself, didn't need to. He walked up slowly, pausing just behind the row where Odessa sat. His presence was steady, unshakable, like a tide coming in. A few passengers glanced up, eyebrows raised. The man in 2C whispered something to his seatmate, who nodded and stared. The hush that settled wasn't from fear. It was from curiosity. People could feel something important was about to happen, even if they didn't know what it was. Odessa didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She knew Jonas was there, had known since the weight in the room shifted. She closed her tray table and folded her hands neatly on her lap. Jonas took 2 steps forward and stopped beside her seat. "Ms. Langford," he said softly. A couple of heads turned more noticeably now. The name meant nothing to most of them, but the tone, it did. Odessa looked up at him. "You made it just in time." Jonas smiled faintly. "Wouldn't miss it." He turned slightly, scanning the front of the cabin. Marla stood near the galley, clipboard in hand. When her eyes met Jonas's, her back straightened. She didn't smile, didn't blink, but her knuckles tightened around the clipboard. He took one step closer and said calmly, "Ms. Vexley, I'll need to speak with you at the gate immediately after landing." Her voice didn't shake, but it thinned. "Sir, I'm not sure what this is regarding." "You will shortly," Jonas replied. Then he turned to the cabin. "Thank you for your patience, everyone. We'll be on the ground soon." The message wasn't for them. Not really, it was for her. Marla stood frozen, her mask cracking just a little. Odessa turned to the window again, watching the city below begin to form from the clouds. Highways like veins, rooftops like tiny squares of memory. She thought of all the times she'd been told where she could sit, where she couldn't. Of all the rooms she'd walked into where no one offered her a chair, and of the ones she'd eventually owned. But this moment was not about payback. It was about permission. She had permission now to decide what would happen next. Not as revenge, but as responsibility. Jonas leaned in again, voice just above a whisper. "Would you like me to relieve her duties now?" Odessa didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the window. "I could," she finally said. "And no one would question it." "No one," Jonas echoed. She shifted in her seat, her voice calm but layered. "But if I do that, what do they learn? That power wins? That humiliation is a tool?" Jonas said nothing. Odessa turned to face him fully. "I want her to know who I am. But more than that, I want her to understand why that matters. I want her to look me in the eye and realize she's not just losing a job. She's losing the version of herself she thought was right." Jonas gave a slow nod, not of agreement, but of understanding. "She'll be escorted to the headquarters," he said. "No uniform, no public duties, and we'll see what she does with what's left." Odessa's fingers tapped lightly against her seat. Let her sit in a seat she's never had to think about before. Then maybe, just maybe, she'll see the cost of assuming someone's worth. The plane touched down with a gentle jolt, wheels skimming the runway. A few people clapped softly, the way people sometimes do when they're unsure if they should. But in 1A, no one made a sound. Odessa reached for her bag and stood up slowly. No rush, no glance back. She had landed long before the plane ever did. The gate at San Francisco International was buzzing with the usual rhythm. Phones ringing, luggage wheels squeaking, voices layered over each other like competing radio stations. But just beyond the glass, inside the jet bridge of Gate 18, time felt like it was moving slower. Jonas stood at the bottom of the ramp, waiting. His phone was tucked away now. No more messages to send. Everything was in motion. When Odessa stepped off the plane, he didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. She looked at him and gave the smallest nod, the kind two people share when the path ahead is already understood. Marla came off next, her steps clipped and careful. She saw Jonas, saw the security officer standing nearby, and paused like someone at the edge of a cold pool. He didn't raise his voice. "Ms. Vexley, you'll come with me." There was a flicker in her face, anger, confusion. She didn't fight it. She adjusted her scarf and followed, silent. Odessa stayed behind for a moment, letting the other passengers file out. Some glanced her way, some didn't. A few looked like they wanted to say something, but no one did. They just kept walking. A young woman, no older than 30, stopped at the door and turned around. "I saw what happened," she said quietly. "I should have said something sooner." Odessa met her gaze, steady and kind. "You just did." In a private conference room 2 floors above the terminal, Jonas sat across from Marla at a wide oak table. A single sheet of paper rested between them, a disciplinary document, unsigned. Odessa stood near the window, looking out at the tarmac. She didn't speak for a long time. Marla finally broke the silence. "I didn't know who she was." Odessa turned slowly. "That's the point," she said. Marla's jaw tightened. "I didn't mean to be disrespectful." "But you were," Jonas said, his voice firmer than before. "Repeatedly." Marla leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "So what now? You firing me?" Odessa didn't answer immediately. She walked toward the table and sat across from her. "No," she said, "not yet." Marla blinked. "Excuse me?" "You're not being fired," Odessa said, calm and clear. "But you will no longer serve in a public-facing role. You'll report to headquarters, shadow the training program, and relearn what this company is supposed to stand for. Jonas slid the paper across the table. You'll sign this agreement. No media contact, no social posts. You're on probation. Marla stared at the page, lips pressed tight. I've been with this airline for 17 years, she said. I know how to do this job. Maybe that's the problem, Odessa replied. You've been doing it so long, you stopped seeing people. Marla said nothing. Odessa stood. She didn't need to raise her voice or lecture. She'd already said enough. As she turned to leave, Jonas followed. They walked down the corridor, past framed photos of smiling passengers and sleek aircraft. Was that the right call? He asked. Odessa didn't look at him. It wasn't about being right. It was about giving her the same thing I wanted that day on the plane, an opportunity to be seen differently. They stepped into the elevator. Jonas stared ahead, hands clasped in front of him. You could have ended her career today. I still might, she said. But first, I want to see who she becomes when no one's applauding or watching. Later that evening, Odessa sat in the back seat of a black sedan, watching the sun set over the Bay Bridge. The sky was streaked with gold and lavender, quiet and powerful. Her phone buzzed again. Message from Jonas. Training dates confirmed. Human First Initiative begins next week. Marla signed. She exhaled slowly and closed her eyes. In the stillness of that ride, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt responsible. A week passed quietly, at least on the surface. The news never picked up what happened on Flight AS-272. There were no viral headlines, no media leaks. But inside the walls of Aureus Skyways, something had changed. Jonas walked into the morning leadership meeting with a folder tucked under his arm and a fresh look of clarity on his face. He wasn't here to talk about routes or fuel margins today. He opened the meeting with a simple sentence. We're redoing the foundation. The room hushed. At the head of the table sat Odessa Langford. No title plaque, no need for it. Everyone knew. She had flown with them, not just as an owner, but as proof. Her silence on that plane had said more than any press conference ever could. She didn't speak until Jonas finished outlining the new initiative. It was called Human First, not flashy, no marketing buzzwords, just plain language that meant what it said. Odessa stood, adjusted her scarf, and addressed the room. I don't want your rehearsed apologies, she said. I want new habits. I want passengers to be treated with care because they're human, not because they paid more or look a certain way. No one interrupted. This isn't about race alone, she continued. It's about dignity. It's about the danger of assuming someone's worth by how they walk, how old they are, or what they wear. If that's been your measure of service, then you've missed the point. She took a breath, slow and even. We are going to fix this from the inside out. No shortcuts, no checkboxes. Jonas followed her words with structure. Retraining schedules, accountability reports, internal audits. Every employee would go through it, executives included. Later that afternoon, Marla Vexley walked into the training center in plain clothes. No badge, no flight pin. The reception desk didn't greet her like they used to. She signed in with a shaky hand. A trainer approached her, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, and the soft presence of someone who's seen people at their worst and still chooses to believe in their better. First day? He asked. Marla nodded. He handed her a packet. We don't teach rules here. We teach empathy. Takes longer, but it sticks. She sat in the back of the room, didn't speak, didn't argue, but she stayed. Across town, the woman behind the counter beamed. Well, look who's back. Odessa smiled and leaned on the counter slightly. Been flying. Anywhere good? She paused. Depends on how you define good. That night, alone at home, she pulled a worn box from the closet. Inside were clippings, old newspaper articles about her father's community work, a faded photo of her and her siblings at a civil rights march, a program from the first flight she ever took as a paying passenger. She added one more item, a printed screenshot of a message from Jonas. Human First officially launched. First sessions complete. Marla showed up early. She stared at it for a moment, then tucked it in the box and closed the lid. Out on the tarmac, a plane bearing the Aureus logo pushed back from the gate. Near the front of the fuselage, newly printed in small but bold letters, were the words, where every seat holds a story and every story matters. In seat 1A of that plane, a new passenger buckled their belt, unaware of the change that had started from that very spot. But somewhere Odessa smiled, not because she'd won, but because something better had begun. 1 month after the flight, Odessa sat at her kitchen table, the morning light slanting across the worn wood. A cup of tea steamed beside her elbow. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the house. She had the windows open, letting in the soft rustle of wind through the oak tree out front. She flipped through the latest internal report from Aureus Skyways. It wasn't thick, just a few pages, but every word meant something. The Human First program had launched in 5 regional hubs. Participation was high. More importantly, the feedback was real. One comment stood out in black ink and blue highlighter. I didn't realize how often I assume things about people. This training made me see my own blind spots. Odessa folded the page carefully and slid it into a drawer where she kept handwritten letters, clipped recipes, and old church bulletins. She didn't need to keep it there, but something about putting it next to the personal things felt right. Later that day, she visited Aureus headquarters for a meeting with Jonas. They didn't sit in the big boardroom. She preferred the small cafe downstairs, the one with 2 strong coffee and laminate tables. Jonas handed her a tablet. We finalized the new campaign. It launches next week. Want to see the first video? Odessa nodded. The screen lit up. A montage played. Scenes from inside real flights. A mother traveling alone with 2 kids. An elderly veteran asking for help overhead. A young man in a hoodie being greeted at the gate with a smile instead of suspicion. At the end, words appeared in simple white text. Every seat holds a story. Every story matters. Odessa didn't speak for a while. It's good, she said at last, but don't let it stop at the ad. Let it live in the aisles. It will, Jonas said, because you sat in that aisle seat and made us see. She looked at him, that steady look of hers that always seemed to carry both warmth and warning. You helped, she said. I followed, he replied. You led. They didn't say much else. Across town, Marla Vexley walked into her 3rd week of training. Still no uniform, still in plain clothes. She didn't chat much with others. She listened, took notes. She had stopped rolling her eyes during the empathy modules. She had even started asking questions. That morning, she stayed late after class and approached the trainer. Can I ask something? She said, her voice low. Of course, he replied. Do you think people can really change? The trainer thought for a second, then nodded slowly. If they're willing to sit in someone else's seat long enough to feel it? Yeah. I do. Back at home, Odessa opened a letter from a retired teacher who had seen the updated policy in action. He told me he was treated like a person, not a problem. Thank you for whatever you did. It worked. She folded the letter with care, then walked out to her porch with her tea, watching as a delivery truck drove by and a neighbor waved from across the street. A breeze lifted the hem of her sleeve. She closed her eyes just for a moment. Years ago, she'd stood at the back of a bus, then the back of a classroom, then the edge of every room that mattered. And now she was at the front, not for applause, not for power, but to make sure no one else had to wait to be seen. Before heading inside, she pulled a pen from her cardigan pocket and scribbled something on a notepad by the door. A line for the next staff memo. No salutation, no closing. Just 5 quiet words. No one deserves to be invisible. Sometimes real power doesn't need to raise its voice. It simply shows up, listens, and changes what needs to be changed. Odessa didn't demand respect. She revealed what happens when you lead with dignity, even when others don't offer it first. So what would you do if you were in her seat or hers? If this story made you think, feel, or reflect, make sure to subscribe. There's more where this came from.